Now, there are some advantages to using WordPress for this. One of the big advantages is that WordPress is inexpensive, right? There's never any kind of a monthly fee for selling something via WordPress. I mean, you've got hosting fees, and you may pay some kind of fees for your payment gateway and stuff like that, but you'd still be paying fees for payment gateways. There's really no sort of additional cost. There's no percent of sale, for example, right? You're never going to have to pay a percentage of your sales to some other outside service if you're selling inside of WordPress. And of course, plugins are cheap, or at least relatively cheap. Let's see, I have, pardon me, I just lost my thing here. This is a comparison chart that I'm getting ready, that it will be using next week for us to compare the various costs of various systems side by side. And, you know, WP eStore costs $49.95, plus there are some extensions you can purchase. MarketPress costs $19.95. Actually, MarketPress has a free version, and then it's got a supported version that costs $19.95 a month. But you can always just do it for 1 month and then never pay for it again. WooCommerce is actually free, but most of the functionality you may need, or a substantial amount of the functionality you may need or want, requires you to purchase extensions. And really, as such, probably WooCommerce is the most expensive. Even though the software itself is free, you know, by the time you string 2 or 3 extensions together, you'll have spent more on WooCommerce than you will on any of the other plugins. Shop costs $55 for a site, and it also has a number of extensions. You could end up spending, you know, $100, $150 at Shop for the software. And then Cart 66 is $89, and some of its functionality can be had if you're using Gravity Forms, and so that's an extension you might add to Cart 66. So there are, you know, probably at the most what you would be doing something like with WooCommerce, where you might spend as much as, you know, $250 or something like that. It's, in the grand scheme of things, it's very inexpensive. So you have these purchase prices, and of course there are free systems out there, entirely free systems out there. I'm not talking about any of them because I don't really believe that people who are serious about developing or selling their products online really need a free system. What they really need is a system that's going to be well supported, is going to last a long time, and is going to do the job for them. There's really, I don't think, any real defensible argument for the economic viability of a plugin that is free. And so if it's free, it doesn't really have, in my mind, economic viability, which means it's not likely to have longevity, which means it's not likely to be a suitable candidate for a real business. Might be suitable for somebody playing around. Might be suitable for somebody in the emerging markets where, you know, $19.95 is a bunch of money, but for most of us it's not going to be. Okay, WordPress is also relatively easy for DIYers. Now, I say relatively because that's relative to other solutions, right? E-commerce in WordPress is not easy, right? It's more complicated than WordPress itself. It's probably one of the most complicated parts of, or elements of, using WordPress. And so all by its lonesome, it's not really easy, but it's certainly relatively easy. It's far simpler than trying to do it using Magneto or OS Commerce. It's, you know, it's relatively easy in comparison to setting up some other types of e-commerce systems. It's certainly doable by a regular layperson. It doesn't, generally speaking, require a programmer to do this kind of thing. So it is fairly easy, or relatively easy. One of the main advantages from my standpoint is that it enables you to maintain control over your store. Oh, pardon me, I just want to say something else about easy. One of the reasons why it's easy is because you can choose a solution that matches the condition. You don't need to learn a complex system in order to do something simple. So if you're going to sell a single product, if you were going to do that with, Magneto or OS Commerce or even one of the other embedded systems, you're going to have to go to a lot of effort to learn something just to do that one simple thing. Whereas in WordPress, you can choose a solution that is very simple to match your very simple need, rather than picking a full-blown, full-featured e-commerce system to do just one very simple thing. And the other thing it has is that it has good learning resources, right? Not my website is, of course, the best, but nevertheless, even if you're not a member of my site and don't watch those videos, there are plenty of other learning resources out there that people can use to learn how to use these plugins and learn how to set them up and that kind of stuff. So there's plenty of good learning resources. Okay, back to maintaining control. One of the benefits of maintaining control is that you're not dependent upon, say, the vendor raising their prices or going out of business. Right now, who knows? Maybe Volusion is here to stay. Maybe those guys have a successful business model and they're going to stay around forever, and maybe their $15 a month is a price that they're never going to raise. But you don't really know, and you're not going to stay in control of it. These things have a way of changing over time, both in price increases and everything else. And if you've had a website with companies like Bluehost for a long time, you've noticed that even though you signed up at a really cheap price way back when, the prices themselves keep creeping up, and you can see people can still get your original cheap price, but you can't anymore because you're already an established customer. So they have a way of, these kinds of things have a way of getting more expensive over time. And it can be difficult for you to decide to cut ties with a proprietary system like that. You also don't run the risk of the vendor shutting your store down, right? There are plenty of horror stories out there about people who are selling something and then somebody else made a complaint and the vendor shut the store down or shut the product down. I have a good friend and client who actually didn't have that specific situation happen, but she certainly had a big potential conflict with her host because somebody accused her of plagiarism, and it wasn't true, but it didn't really matter. It was an accusation, and so the host went to shut her site down. That's the kind of thing that can happen if you're not in control of your store. And you generally don't have full control over the look and feel of your site when you are using some other system. So, in my mind, probably the largest advantage of using WordPress to sell your products is that you get to maintain control over the store, over what it sells, and you don't really have to worry about something happening outside of your control. Another advantage of using WordPress, of course, is that WordPress is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, which means that there's lots of opportunity for support. Right? You don't just have to ask a question in my forum. You can ask a question in the plugin forum. You can ask questions on other kinds of forums. You can Google search for problems or solutions to problems. And because WordPress is everywhere, it's not really that difficult to solve problems yourself by looking around for answers. That also means that there's lots of innovation, right? These things have exploded over the last couple of years, and when I first started teaching e-commerce, there was a fairly limited number of e-commerce choices that worked very well, and WooCommerce didn't even exist, right? WooCommerce is one of the biggest players now, but it didn't exist 2 years ago, and so there's an awful lot of innovation that's happening in WordPress and in WordPress plugins that make working inside of WordPress advantageous. It's also very highly customizable, and it's customizable in a bunch of different ways, right? Oh, pardon me. One other thing to say about WordPress is everywhere. It's also easy to find consultants to work for you, right? When you start going off into more specialized or separate e-commerce systems, your pool of candidates to choose from is quite a bit smaller, which means that it can cost you more to get help like with Magneto or with OS Commerce or something like that. So It's easy to find consultants. WordPress is very highly customizable, and generally speaking, so are the plugins. One of the reasons, of course, is that you have very simple access to styles and style sheets. So you can make lots of changes to the appearance of a store simply with CSS. Most of the plugins have some kind of style options that don't require you to do anything other than just click a button and choose something from a drop-down list in order to change the style of the store or aspects of the store. Most plugins will allow you to create custom templates for different aspects of the store. So if you want to add things or subtract things from certain store pages, most of the time, the worst case is that you just have to create a custom template for that. Now that's not something a beginner can do, but nevertheless, for regular WordPress developers, quite simple. And in that regard, most plugins have APIs that will allow a web developer to extend them. And so if you look at any of the boxes that I've created for MarketPress, for example, you'll notice, well, you may not notice it, but those boxes were created using MarketPress's API. And so their API is created for you to be able to extend it. One of the plugin that I wrote for Shop is based on Shop's API and is intended, to extend the power of Shop onto Thesis. And so this is again, it's not a beginner's task, but nevertheless, it's not a task that's outside of the realm of possibility or is not particularly difficult to do for a real programmer or a real developer. And then, of course, finally, there are a lot of pret-a-porter solutions, right? A lot of ready-to-wear solutions. So even though things may be highly customizable, actually, there are plenty of cases where you don't really even need to bother with customization. Right, where you can take something off the shelf. In fact, each of the things we talk about over the next few weeks has its own off-the-shelf solution for what the site looks like and how the site's set up, which can make setting it up, customizing it, configuring it much simpler than other options. So those are the advantages of using WordPress.